All right, time for chapter 27. Excuse me. Okay, so chapter 27 is all on, mostly focusing on the male reproductive system, but it does start off a little bit with the differences in the two reproductive systems for male and female during fetal development. So again, this is a kind of highlight video, so it doesn't have everything that was covered in the chapter. So I'm actually starting a little bit further down in the PowerPoint. So with your determination of your sex, determined by your chromosomes mostly, there can be variations in the chromosomes, but for males, it's the XY chromosome, what determines that it's a male, and the XX chromosome determines whether or not it's going to be female. So in your gametes, the egg will always have an X chromosome. The sperm both have either an X or a Y chromosome. So in this pairing of gametes, you have an X chromosome and an X chromosome, and that will make a double X chromosome female. There can be some variations with issues with development, but in general, double X chromosome ends up equaling a female, a XY chromosome, so the Y sperm determining that it's going to be a male. So that one's your pairing is XY is going to eventually become a male. So again, the sex of the child is determined by which sperm fertilizes the egg. So whether or not it's an X chromosome sperm, or a Y chromosome sperm. So in order for the reproductive system to, or the fetus to start developing as a male, there needs to be a gene on the Y chromosome. That gene is the SRY gene. It's called the sex determining region on the Y chromosome. So there's your SRY. That gene is only found in males. So again, only found on that Y chromosome, which is not in females. That chromosome codes for a protein called the testes determining factor, or TDF for short. So SRY is the gene, TDF is the protein. So when that protein is made, it initiates the development of the testes. So the testes are where we get the production of the testosterone hormone, which begins at about 8 to 9 weeks in fetal development. And it helps to stimulate the male reproductive system to start forming as compared to the female reproductive system from forming. So in the little picture up at the top, we see the paramesonephric ducts are degenerating. So here in the purple, they're starting to degenerate because they're not, because this reproductive system is not going to be female, it's going to be male. So your mesonephric ducts in this kind of green color are actually starting to develop, and this is kind of like a pre-development for the male reproductive system. At the same time, the testes will secrete the Mullerian inhibiting factor, so again causing the degeneration of the paramesonephric ducts. So again, the ducts that are in purple, that if this were a female, that would develop, and then the green Mullerian ducts would not develop. Oops, went the wrong direction. Hold on. Okay, so what determines the helps to guide the fetus into developing into a female has nothing to do with estrogen levels during development, because they're very high during pregnancy. So the mother who's carrying the child has very high estrogen levels during development. So it's not the presence of estrogen that causes female development. It's the absence of the androgen hormone, so no testosterone, which means also no Mullerian inhibiting factor. So therefore, the paramesonephric ducts actually become the reproductive system, and the fetus will become into a female. Of course, again, there's also issues with development in some people, but in general, absence of the androgen hormones, the person develops as female. So skipping ahead a few slides all the way to a fully developed reproductive system and looking just at the scrotum, which is the sac of tissue here that contains the testes on the inside. So here in the orange or reddish color is the pouch, or is the scrotum, and on the inside of that is the testes. In the scrotum, your left testicle is usually lower than the right so that they don't get pressed up against each other, so give each other a little bit of room. It's also separated into two different compartments, which unfortunately in the picture you can't see, but there is a septum that divides it from the right and the left, and on the outside, the perineal raphe is a seam that you see on the outside that shows you where this internal medium septum is dividing the left and right sides of the scrotum. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Nope, I'm going to keep it. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. So for the testes that reside in the scrotum, in order for them to create sperm, they need a cooler environment. So being in the scrotum outside of the body helps to prevent it from becoming too warm. So core body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. For sperm to be produced, the sperm needs to do so at around 35 degrees Celsius, so a little bit cooler than body temperature. So hanging out outside the body, away from the body, helps to keep the testes cooler than they should. So that's why it's outside. That's why the testes reside there, not because it's near the penis or anything. It's just because it allows it for essentially temperature control to be able to produce sperm. Okay, so in order to regulate the temperature in the scrotum, there's multiple ways of doing so. I'm going to show you pictures later of these different how these different things function. So first one is the cremaster, which is strips off the internal abdominal oblique muscle, which in cold temperatures helps to draw the testes upward toward the body, so warm them up a bit since they're hanging outside. It's cold, so they're getting colder and not as protected to make sure that they maintain their 35-degree temperature. So by contracting them and pulling the testes upward toward the body, then they can be warmed by the warmer body heat. Opposite case, in warmer temperatures, that muscle will relax so that the testes are suspended further away from the body and therefore away from the internal body temperature and allow it to cool off. The other mechanism to regulate the temperature is from the dartos fascia. So it's, again, another muscle that will help contracting and adjusting where the scrotum is in relation to the body. So this muscle will contract when it's cold, which helps to wrinkle the scrotum and helps to hold the testes against the body. So again, bringing it back towards the body, helping to warm it up when it's cold. So in this case, it helps to reduce the surface area. So you go from having whatever surface area for the scrotum, and then when it bends up, get this done, it shortens how much space can be lost, gives it like less space that can be lost, that you lose heat from. So that helps to keep the testes warm even though it's cold outside. So reducing the surface area, and therefore preventing heat loss from all that surface area being exposed to the outside environment. So the last mechanism is through the Pampiniform plexus. It's a network of veins that surrounds the testicular artery. So you have blood supply of the testicular artery into the testes, and then surrounding that testicular artery is the Pampiniform plexus. So it's a webbing of different veins that surrounds that testicular artery. So what this does is it creates a countercurrent heat exchanger. So blood into the testes flowing in one direction, blood going away from the testes around the testicular artery, so the Pampiniform plexus. That blood is going away from the testes back towards the body, so it's countercurrent, so they're going in opposite directions. So there's your countercurrent. And instead of in the nephron where they're exchanging water and salt, in this case you're exchanging heat. So you have the blood from your internal body that's fairly warm going into the testes, and then feeding that blood into the testes. Well, the veins that are outside of that testicular artery, again, I want to show you the picture, that blood has actually been cooled, and so as it's going back up towards the body, it's stealing heat away from the testicular artery and cooling down the blood that's going into the testes. So by the time it reaches the testes, the blood has significantly cooled. So here's a simplified picture of that. So on the left, we have our testicular artery bringing blood into the testes, and then on the outside, of course, this would be surrounding the testicular artery, but in this case, just being simplified, as that blood goes towards the testes, that blood is losing heat to the venous blood on the outside of that artery, which helps to cool it down. So here we have our color coding with our blue and red with our purple in a kind of transition color. So cools it down as it goes towards the testes, and then of course blood flowing through the testes and all the way away from your core body temperature. So it significantly cools for a few degrees cooler. So as that blood starts going back up towards the body, going past the testicular artery, it's a lot cooler, and so it steals heat away from that artery and starts to warm up as that blood goes back up towards your towards the actual part of your body. So here's the picture I mentioned of the different parts that I was talking about. So here we have our testicular artery, and so it's on the inside of here, this little blue webbing being the Pampiniform plexus. So this structure here. So again, blood going into the testes. It's getting cooled by the venous blood going in the opposite direction, so our countercurrent heat exchange. So making sure that the blood reaches the testes is not as warm as the body temperature, and therefore helping to maintain the temperature inside the testes. The other two on the outside are the muscles. So our cremaster muscle being extended from the external oblique, helping to act like a suspenders for the scrotum to help pull the scrotum up, and therefore keeping the testes closer to the body in cold weather, or relaxing to allow them to descend, get away from that hot core body temperature, and cool off. Other one, the dartos fascia, so this muscle here, helping to reduce surface area, so preventing the scrotum from losing heat during cold weather, so that the testes have the right temperature to be able to make sperm at that 35 degrees Celsius temperature. So moving inside the testes, where the sperm is actually produced, as well as where testosterone is produced, your sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules. So that's this section here on the inside of this kind of dark pink ring, and on the inside this little lumen area where it's kind of more white in color with a little bit of stringy kind of texture on the inside. So those are actually tails of sperm. They're sticking out, and eventually that sperm will be released and go up through different series of tubes to finally be either ejaculated or reabsorbed back into the body. So one very important cell in these seminiferous tubules are your nurse cells. So they provide different jobs in not only the development of sperm, but also protecting sperm. I believe later somewhere in this chapter it actually says this. I'm just going to explicitly say this now. One of the jobs that the nurse cell does is to protect the germ cells. So later when we talk about the development of sperm and gametes just in general, because they actually have half the DNA that a normal cell has, that makes them immunologically different from regular cells. So your immune system doesn't recognize it as something that belongs to the body. So therefore it would attack it if it were able to detect its presence. So in between, the nurse cells have very tight junctions in between them. So those tight junctions in between the nurse cells help to prevent the immune system cells from detecting the presence of the gametes, so preventing them from being attacked by your immune system. It also helps to promote the development of the sperm, so giving the sperm, as they're developing, different nutrients, waste removal from them, as well as giving them growth factor and other needs that other developmental needs as it's going from the kind of precursor cells and finally developing into a full sperm. So we'll cover that in a little bit. The other cells that are in the testes are your interstitial endocrine cells, and these are in between the tubules. So let me raise this up here. So these cells here in this yellow triangle are the ones that produce the produce your testosterone. So you have different locations for the production of your sperm in the seminiferous tubules. And then in our little triangle, which you only can partially see, your interstitial endocrine cells that actually produce the testosterone. Okay, so I just said that, and here's the slide that needs it. So those tight junctions in between the nurse cells form what's called the blood-testes barrier. So if you can remember from chapter, I think it's 14, something like that, where we're talking about the blood-brain barrier, blood-brain barrier and blood-cerebral-spinal fluid barrier in the brain region, so protecting the brain from anything crossing over from the blood. You have a similar barrier to protect the sperm. So the sperm, also called germ cells, are immunologically different from the rest of the body cells. So again, because they have half the DNA that a normal cell has, then those immune cells would detect this difference and therefore would attack those cells because they aren't a normal cell in the body. So that those tight junctions separate them from the immune system and prevent them from being attacked. It also prevents antibodies, so those big large proteins made by those plasma cells, as well as other large molecules that are in the blood, from getting to the germ cells. So basically just kind of like a protective wall in between them. Okay, so with your sperm, they're made in the seminiferous tubules, and then they're collected in their testes. So it's a collection of different ducts where the sperm will flow down. They flow on a fluid secreted by the nurse cells. So they're just kind of, not saying lazy, but just kind of flowing around. It's like, okay, no action needed right now. So they don't swim while they're in the reproductive tract. They just kind of go, again, not lazy, but just kind of float around to where they're going to eventually possibly be ejaculated if they are, or if not, just reabsorbed back into the body. So while the sperm are in this area, they do not get a large amount of oxygen because the testicular artery has a poor oxygen supply because of a low blood pressure. So by the time you get all the way down there, there's too low of blood pressure to push enough fluid out to have that oxygen exchange. So pushing the dissolved oxygen that was in the blood, pushing that into the testes. So you have low oxygen supply in that area. So I'll show you in a picture later in sperm development, showing the large mitochondria that uses the little bit of oxygen that is supplied to be able to maintain the energy levels and help to survive the hypoxic environment. So kind of breakdown of this word. So the oxit part being for oxygen, or the ox part for oxygen, and then hypo being low. So here we go, low for hypo, and ox for oxygen. So in this low oxygen environment, not only helps them survive while they're in the testes, but also to survive in their female reproductive tract, since they're not getting a blood supply while they're surviving in the female reproductive tract. So they actually can live in there, I can't remember, it's either 5 or 7 days inside the female reproductive tract on their way to maybe possibly fertilizing the egg. Okay, skipping ahead a little bit. So we'll talk about this sperm later, but you have your sperm. In order for it to flow out of the penis, as well as other functions where it's inside the vagina and help it to stick to the female accessory organs so that it can get into the uterus and fertilize the egg eventually, needs to have your seminal fluid made up of a fluid from the seminal vesicles that forms about 60% of the semen, so that's your seminal fluid. And then the prostate gland, which is here, makes the other majority of the other portion of your semen, which is a thin, milky secretion. So about 30% of your semen is made from the prostate gland. So up here, seminal vesicle, down here, prostate gland. So it's kind of like some of those like chemical cleaners or whatever, where the two different ingredients are separated until you finally pour them down the drain or wherever you're going to pour them. And then when they mix, then they'll have their desired effect. So this is the same thing. And I'll talk about it in like about a slide or two, why they're separated until they need to be mixed. Another glandular secretion comes from the bulbourethral gland. It helps to lubricate the head of the penis, and is also protecting the sperm by neutralizing the acidity in not only in the urine in the urethra, so as it's exiting out. So again, you're sharing the road. So the urine could be acidic, so to protect it from that environment, the excretion from the bulbourethral glands help to protect it, so neutralizing that area before the sperm gets through it. Some of that actually should mix with the semen, and also should help maybe even neutralizing the acidity of the vagina as well. Okay, so next I'm going to go into the actual production of the sperm, but because there's a significant portion talking about mitosis versus meiosis, and that's going to take quite a significant time, I'm actually going to do a part 2 video for this chapter. So I'll start there on the next one.